There comes a time in every gamer's journey where they discover a game that changes their outlook on this little hobby that we all know to love. It could be a game that hits the player emotionally and at a point in their life where the story becomes relatable. Maybe it's a game where the combat was easy to pick up but hard to master, and it forced you to overcome those tough obstacles. Or it could even be a strategy sim where you have to use your brain to think and utilize the game's tools and mechanics in order to overcome the obstacle. Whatever the case may be, it affects the gamers in a unique way that follows them for the rest of their life. The only way to describe this experience is in one word: a classic. Being a gamer that's open to most genres of gaming, of course I've heard of the Final Fantasy franchise, and I even have a family member who's deep into it, but I never really got into it myself. Growing up as a kid, I was more of a platformer guy, so I was big on the Sly Coopers and Ratchet and Clanks of the world, and I was still a bit sports fans too, so I was getting every sports title essentially. There's a saying in the Final Fantasy community that the first Final Fantasy you played will be your favorite. And I'm not gonna call them liars, but that definitely wasn't the case for me. See, my first Final Fantasy was 13, and while I loved the music and story, I fucking hated the combat. I wasn't a fan of the real-time turn-based shift mechanic that they were trying to implement, and with the combination of some of the bosses being bullet sponges, it was a hard pass for me. I always wanted to try the Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, so I caught it on a Steam sale a couple months ago, and while I enjoyed Remake, Rebirth was not much of my cup of tea either. Both of them had serious pacing issues, but it was more evident in Rebirth. Yes, I'm looking at you, Kate Sif Boxstone session. Not to mention the ending of Rebirth completely threw me off, and I was often comparing it to Kingdom Hearts with all the weird multiversal alternate reality they had going on. When I asked you all what Final Fantasy you played next after beating Rebirth, the consensus answer was between 6 and 10, and since I've already played a bit of 10 before starting the Final Fantasy VII series, I went ahead and tried out 6. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to announce that I might have discovered a classic on my hands. What's going on with all you beautiful people, extraterrestrials, or whatever you want to identify yourself as? It's your boy Rob, yes, just Rob, and I'm back at it with another vid. Final Fantasy VI was a game that completely took me by surprise, especially after coming from the Final Fantasy VII remakes. It's something about a game previously released on the Super Nintendo, while not having the graphical hardware of today's era, but still being able to have a wonderful art and can still bring deep emotions out of me. It's something I can always appreciate in those older games. If you all love video essays such as the video you're watching now, then go ahead and consider subbing to the channel and tapping the bell icon so you never miss a video from yours truly. There will be spoilers for Final Fantasy VI in this video, so if you're currently playing or if you have any interest and care about the story, then I advise you go ahead and click off the video and come back once you're done with the game. Now that we got everything out of the way, everybody strap yourselves in, hands and feet inside the ride at all times, and this is a story about how Final Fantasy VI stole my heart. But first, somebody cue my intro. Final Fantasy VI opens the story up with an elegant yet eerie note that let me know I was in for a ride right from the jump. 1,000 years before the events of the game, a massive war known as the War of Magi nearly destroyed the world. The three gods who were known as the Warring Triad clashed and cost the lives of many innocent people. After witnessing their destruction, they sealed themselves as statues and warned the Espers to never awaken them. Espers and humans lived in peace for a time until another war broke out when humans attempted to seize the Espers' powers for themselves. The Espers winded up creating a new realm where they can live in peace away from the humans, until the current events of the game, that is. Final Fantasy VI might have one of the best world buildings I've ever experienced in a video game. It has that cyberpunk and Mass Effect levels of world building, which I hold in high regard as the pinnacle of gaming in my opinion. It lets you know exactly what type of world you're about to embark in, while still providing enough mystery and speculation for the imagination. Ever since the events of the Warring Triad, the world, which was previously magic heavy, is now more of a steampunk vibe with a lot of industrial buildings and coal mines. And while magic is not necessarily forbidden, it is something extremely rare to see in a world where virtually no magic users exist. So you start the game off as Terra, and you're in these mech suits that can use magic, granted if the soldier has a magic transfusion. More on that later. They're prepared to walk into the town of Narsh as they discover that there's a frozen Esper in town. See, Magitech is ran by the Empire and Emperor Gestahl, who wants to harness the power of magic to rule over the world. But as mentioned from the backstory, that could potentially bring the world into ruin. As Terra and the Imperial soldiers march into the Narsh and hear a melody that's been stuck in my head ever since I played this game, it's just such a beautiful song. Terra eventually breaks free from Imperial control and begins searching for answers about who she is and why she can use magic at all. Along the way, you're introduced to a resistance group called the Returners, who are fighting back against the Empire. At this point into the game, we're able to walk around and explore the town of Narsh and progress the story. I love the snowy tundra of this town, and with the coal mines, you get the vibe of that industrial setting I mentioned earlier. Kefka, who's the main villain in this game, is in search for Terra and will stop at nothing to get her back to the Empire. You end up encountering some of the early party members as well, such as Locke the Thief, or Treasure Hunter as he calls himself, and Edgar, who is the king of the Figaro Kingdom, and they convince Terra to join the Returners. Although Terra knows the Empire is no good, since most of her memories come from her being an Imperial puppet, she doesn't really have the will to fight against them at first. It's also through Locke's journey through South Figaro after Kefka attempted to bring down the castle in search of Terra that he meets Celes, who is an Imperial general who defects from the Empire as she doesn't agree to their plans. And while I could keep walking you through every major story beat, because believe me, I'm only scratching the surface, that's not really what made Final Fantasy VI special to me. What really pulled me in was how the game lets you experience this world through its map, its combat systems, and the way it gives you freedom earlier than I was expecting. By the time you get to Figaro, which is roughly an hour into the game, you're already able to explore the world map. Now granted, you can't explore all areas on the map until you meet your pilot Setzer, but you're at least able to travel in between Narsh and Figaro and explore some of the smaller towns. In these towns, you're able to buy weapons, armor, relics, and items. Obviously, I was broke in the beginning stages, so I couldn't buy much, but towards the middle and end, you can find some pretty solid weapons. Being that this is a 90s JRPG, there are random encounters in this game, but with the pixel remaster, there's a setting to turn it off and also to boost your XP and guild amount. I love that addition because there are times where I'm in a dungeon and need to complete a puzzle to progress, but don't really want to worry about fighting enemies I'm already over leveled for. It also makes grinding less grindy by allowing me to earn double XP and reducing a chunk of the time I would have put into that grind and instead getting back into the story. Final Fantasy VI uses an active time-based system, which is pretty much a turn-based, but each individual character has their own active gauge meter for when you can get them commands. The combat is not just your standard wait around until an action is performed, as enemies will still attack you even if you aren't planning your next move, but it actually makes the combat feel fast-paced and snappy when you're in those intense boss fights. While Final Fantasy VI doesn't do anything that blows me away in its combat, given the hardware limitations it had for its time, it at least does things that makes it stand out, such as giving characters their own unique playstyles. Edgar uses a crossbow, and when using different tool items that you can buy at shops, he can perform different actions such as hitting enemies with poison arrows, and my favorite move being turning his crossbow to a chainsaw to do insane damage. Celes has an ability called Runic, which allows her to absorb and also heal any magic ability that's targeted towards her. But my personal favorite has to be Sabin, who was later found out to be Edgar's twin brother. And after choosing to vacate his claim to the throne after choosing a life of freedom, he rejoins the fight with the Returner years later and has a cool martial arts theme with his kid. And in order to use his abilities, you gotta enter command input similar to a fighting game. And he has probably some of the coolest abilities in the game, being able to suplex damn near anything, including the train. What really stood out to me wasn't just that these systems existed, it was how naturally they fit into the world. Nothing felt overly complicated or felt like filler, and every mechanic seemed designed to keep me moving forward and having fun as I'm progressing through the game, instead of just dragging along and making me dread playing through a story, unlike other games. Final Fantasy VI respects your time, and as someone coming from more modern entry to the series, that was a breath of fresh air. What I love most about the game, other than the story, is its pacing. From the time the game starts all the way until you introduce the Sabin, it's about 2.5 hours. I know a lot of people in my comments over TikTok were saying that they would want a remake of this game, but with the current square pacing with the Final Fantasy VII remakes, I'm not too sure people will want that. By the time we make it to Sabin, it will be 8 hours in with hella mini games in between all of that. From the very beginning, Final Fantasy VI never has you sitting still for too long. Just when you think you have the game settled and you're in a flow and a routine, the game shifts perspective or places you in a completely different situation altogether. Again, coming from the modern Final Fantasy VII remake, it felt as though there was a decent amount of hand-holding and issues with the pacing. Like, why is Sephiroth constantly mind-fucking clouded between majority of the cutscenes in both games? And according to some of the OG fandom, Sephiroth wasn't in the game as much as he was compared to the modern remakes. I think that's what I like about Kefka a lot, and I'll briefly go over him because, boy, there was a lot I want to talk about with Kefka. But he was only in the scenes where they matter. Every time he shows up, you know shit is about to go down, and he had such an eerie, deranged presence about him, and you knew that he was nothing to fuck with from the beginning. Again, more on him later. The game oftentimes changes things up, but you're not always controlling the same characters, and you're not always approaching the objectives the same way. There was a session early in the game where you were infiltrating South Figaro with Locke, and you need to get deeper to the Imperial camp. I found myself stuck on where to go because anytime you were caught by one of the soldiers, you had to restart. Since Locke is a thief and his combat style involves using his steal ability to take items from enemies, I didn't know that in certain mission settings, like this one, it could also be used to steal enemies' clothes to act as an imposter. He's probably the only party member in the entire game where I had to use his unique skill in order to progress the story. And while this has been done in 7 remakes, it wasn't done as clever and without the game having to tell you in the big bold letters what to do. The game trusts you to use your critical thinking skills and pick things up naturally as you travel from town to town and talk to NPCs. Despite completing the game in about 40 hours, it never felt padded to me. I rarely felt like the game was wasting my time or stretching content just to inflate its runtime. If the story and pacing is what kept me playing, then the music is what absolutely got me hooked. This soundtrack has some songs where I just catch myself stopping what I'm doing just to listen. I'm talking about the Awakening song, Celes theme, Omen, Dancing Mad. There are so many good songs in this OST that I can go on for days. In a game with pixel 16-bit art, a lot of the emotion needs to come from the art direction and the music in order to set up those heavy hitting moments in the game. And it's safe to say that in this game, the music does an incredible amount of that heavy lifting. I'm talking about scenes such as Terra and the Imperial soldiers marching through Narsh. And there's also Celes in the opera where there's so many great moments where the music is telling you the story and words aren't even needed. Each song feels intentional, from the town themes to the dungeon tracks to the boss themes. Everything just provides a memorable experience. Hell, I still find myself day to day after beating it humming the Awakening and world map themes, and I couldn't get them out of my head even if I wanted to. Some tracks make the world feel warm and alive, while others lean heavily into some more intense moments into the story. But the moral of the story is you don't need to understand the mood the game is trying to convey, because the art and the music and the atmosphere is doing that work for you. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was a bit skeptical going to a pixel game, even if it is a remaster, but I'm honestly surprised that the graphics wasn't that bad, considering it was a game originally released in 1994 and it didn't get the big modern graphical overhaul that we see in the more current Final Fantasy entries. Sure, it had moments where I was a bit confused on how to travel through the different pixel displays, but you could just credit that to me being more of a 2000s gamer. There were moments where everything just clicked in the game: the music, the medieval steampunk setting, the pacing, and I was just emotionally invested in ways I didn't expect to be. A lot of people told me to give this one a try after Rebirth, and I thought it was just some typical modern FF sucks, classics are better argument that I often saw when searching in Reddit communities, but I was actually hooked pretty early on with the story and characters. With the atmosphere firmly set in place, the game was ready to start hitting a lot harder and emotionally than I ever could have expected. There are few, and I mean very few, stories that have stuck with me well after my runtime of playing a game, and even to my own personal life. I think of Cyberpunk's theme about corporate capitalism and how it can have negative effects on the citizens of a beautiful but crime-ridden town. There's also Persona 4 for me that focuses on facing your inner insecurities and reaching out to the truth within yourself. And you have more recently Claire Obscure Expedition 33's story about grief and how there is no clear way we should all handle it. I think once the story can resonate with you in the game, then you know you have something special. And now I can add Final Fantasy VI to that list. As a first-time player to the entire Final Fantasy franchise, I wasn't ready for the shift that Kefka brought to this game. It was a man that, just seemed like your typical type of crazy, turned into a straight maniac. We're talking about a guy who poisoned the water supply of Doma just to prove the point that he was willing to kill anyone in his way. There's also a moment where Terra discovered that she was half Esper, which explains how she's able to use magic, and she ended up working in agreement with Emperor Gestahl to have the Espers use their power for good in a potential upcoming war. At this point in the story, Kefka has been captured by the Empire for the war crimes involving him poisoning Doma. Unknowingly to Terra and the rest of the returners, this was all a plot to have Terra bring the Espers to their world and turn them to Magicite, which is a shard that allows humans to use their powers for magic. Once Terra returns with the Espers, the sneaky, slimy Kefka shows up and begins to turn all the Espers to Magicite and kill the Imperial Army leader Leo. Once we meet him again in the floating continent to face him, he starts the Warring Triad and begins betraying and killing off Emperor Gestahl. And in the scuffle with Shadow, who's another one of your party members, the balance of the Warring Triad was thrown off and their powers was unleashed, and it nearly caused the entire planet to blow up. Kefka did it. He did exactly what he wanted and now ruled over the world. All that was left was a desolate wasteland full of dead crops and people who ultimately gave up on their life. The party has now been split up across the world, and we now control Celes, who has been awakened to see it and was informed that it's been an entire year since the events of Kefka, and they are now the only ones on this small island. The others who were previously on the island eventually jumped off to their deaths as they believed that there was no hope left in this world. Sid tells Celes that he is growing old and doesn't have much time to live. After Celes tends to Sid, he eventually dies, and this caused extreme despair for Celes. With Celes downtrodden, abandoned, and no will to live, she eventually does the unthinkable and jumps off the cliff to attempt to take her own life. This scene, man, this scene was probably my favorite in the entire game, not only because it's a complete 180 from the character of Celes, but it's also real. Up to this point, Celes was seen as a military general who was rough around the edges and is an independent woman. We're talking about a woman who first refused to accept Locke's help to escape the Imperial prison and would rather face her execution with pride. So to see her willing to take her own life was jarring, but it was also real. I hate to make the vid dark, but put yourself in Celes' shoes for a second. You and the people who you would consider close friends essentially failed to stop Kefka the madman from almost blowing up the entire planet. And after being awakened for a year, you've been told that on this tiny island, you and another close friend that you would consider a grandpa are the only people left. Everyone else lost the will to live and took their own lives, and now your grandpa becomes ill and passes away. Can you really blame her, especially after everything just became so catastrophic right before he passed out a year? Celes eventually wakes up after realizing that she was unsuccessful in her attempt, and she notices a seagull with a wing bandaged by a bandana, the same bandana that gives her hope that Locke is still alive. She returned to the house and discovered a letter from Sid directing her to a hidden basement where he had been building a raft to help her escape the island. With the raft, we're now able to explore around and get into some random encounter. And speaking of the encounters, in this new water ruin, the background images now feature dried land and withered crops, and even enemies down their own due to dehydration. That's just another excellent touch by Square to emphasize the sheer impact of Kefka's destruction. The rest of the party members are also doing their own things and adjusting to this new world. Savin is protecting the town from collapsing buildings, while Cyan is living in the solitude on Mount Zozo, where he's writing love letters to a woman on behalf of a fallen soldier. And don't worry, as weird as that sounds, he does eventually stop himself as he feels he is morally wrong. Edgar is operating on a different alias and leading a group of thieves to Figaro so he can rescue the trapped people of his kingdom. Locke is searching for a way to revive his lost love, Rachel, inside the Phoenix Cave to find the legendary Phoenix Magicite, who is believed to have a power to bring back the dead. All these characters can eventually be convinced to join the party to take the fight back to Kefka. We also get a new airship from Setzer, who uses the airship of his former rival, the Falcon, after the previous airship crashed. All the characters go through their own personal struggles, which eventually gives them the will to live and join your party. But I think this was done best in the instance of Terra. See, while Terra did lose her memories due to the mind-wiping crown that Kefka used to enslave her, there was also one question she always had within herself. Who is Terra on the inside? For most of the game, Terra's struggle isn't about power, it's about identity. She was also defined by her being half Esper and capable of wielding magic and being used as a weapon for the Empire, but never viewed as a person. Even to open the sequence of the game, you see one of the Imperial soldiers state that with the crown on her head, she won't even be able to breathe unless they tell her to. Even when she breaks free, that question is never really answered about who she is, and she only fights because she feels as though she's needed, not because she understands why she should. And when the world is destroyed by Kefka, she doesn't do what the typical hero does and steps up, but she disappears. Again, if we're going by the same grace that we gave Celes, then how can we really blame Terra? When you finally find her in the ruined town of Mobilis, she isn't leading a resistance or searching for vengeance. She's protecting orphans who lost everything just like the rest of the world did. When asked to regroup with the party to take on Kefka, she refuses. Not because she's afraid of the outcome, but she's afraid of losing the little piece she was finally able to build in her life. She learns that love is not as a grand romantic concept, but as something quiet and human, like protecting others, caring for them, and choosing to stay. It's the first time that Terra lives for something instead of being used as a weapon. Similar to Celes, Terra's reluctance is portrayed as weakness. It's understandable. The world is broken and hope feels pointless, but when there's a monster that attacks the town and threatens the livelihood of the children she's sworn to protect, she realized that love isn't something that disappears when you fight for it. It's something that gives you the reason to fight in the first place. When Terra does agree to return to the party, it's not because the world needs saving, but it's because love gave her a reason to care about the outcome. In a world where Kefka represents destruction without purpose, Terra becomes the opposite and becomes someone who finds meaning in connection. And honestly, both Celes and Terra's journey kinda reflects the state of Final Fantasy VI and this post-apocalyptic world. What started off as a game about defeating evil and restoring balance turned into a story about perseverance and why people keep going even when the world tells them that it's over. By the time you finally reach Kefka at the top of his tower, it's clear that he's no longer just a villain, but he's an embodiment of nihilism. A man who believes that life is meaningless, hope is merely a joke, and that destruction is the only truth left in the world. The design of this fight was awesome as well, as Kefka is now considered a god of magic and his presence is built from broken statues of God that you fight through, all while backed by one of the most iconic tracks in the game, Dancing Mad. Everything about the moment feels oppressive and the very fate of the world rested on this battle. Kefka is a madman who isn't fighting to rule anymore, he's fighting to prove that under his reign, nothing matters, and that's why beating him at that final battle is so rewarding. Every character standing against him represents the opposite of what he stands for, and they are even directly affected by his own actions. There are people who lost their homes, lost their families, lost their futures, and they still choose to keep going. Not because of how this is typically how fantasy stories go, but because life in this world was still worth protecting. Final Fantasy VI wasn't just a game that I played, but it was a game I felt. It took me on a journey that started as just giving it a try based on my sub recommendations, to a journey full of hope and despair that I wasn't fully invested in. From Terra discovering who she really is, to Locke learning how to overcome his past and finding love again, to Celes finding the strength to live when everything seemed lost. When playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, it felt as though the story was taking away my imagination and basically telling me that this is a story that we're telling and we're not leaving anything up to interpretation in this bloated world. However, in this game, the story never asked me to watch or directly told me what the themes were going to be. It allowed me to use my critical thinking and allowed me to experience it for myself and carry a piece of it with me. From the very first steps into Naris to exploring a world filled with wonder and danger, to hearing a soundtrack that somehow made 16-bit pixels feel alive, everything about this game was brilliant. The pacing keeps you moving and the story challenges your critical thinking, and the world makes you feel like you're a part of it. Final Fantasy VI stole my heart because it's the pure essence of why I fell in love with games in the first place. The joy of discovery, the thrill of adventure, and the rare feeling of being completely immersed in something bigger than yourself. The game didn't ask for my time, it instead stole my heart. And for me, that's what makes it unforgettable. Thank you all for watching the video, and I really hope you enjoyed it. It was a lot working on it. I'm currently playing Final Fantasy X, and I'm actually enjoying my time with it as well, but I want to save a good chunk of my thoughts for a future vid. I didn't plan on making a video for the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, but hey, if y'all asked for it, then I don't mind giving the people what they asked for. Again, if you liked the video, then go ahead and tap the thumbs up button on your way out for me. And as always, it's been your boy Rob. Yes, just Rob. And I'm out. Peace.